5 months before Daniel Day-Lewis donned the iconic stovepipe hat and fully immersed himself in the role of Lincoln for the biopic of the same name, a lesser-known actor took up the mantle of our 16th president. His name is Benjamin Walker, and in 2012, he was Abraham Lincoln, vampire hunter. You heard that right, vampire hunter. The film was a gory, action-packed adaptation of the book of the same name by Seth Graham Smith, the author known for inserting his own imagination into things that already exist. Zombies into Pride and Prejudice for his 2009 book Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Murderous thieves who want to watch the world burn into the birth of Jesus Christ for his 2012 novel Unholy Night. And vampires into the life of the 16th President of the United States. With his trusty axe, the young Illinois lawyer hacked and slashed his way into the White House. What I loved most about the book were the small details of real life that the author decided were actually because of vampires. The death of Lincoln's mother at a young age, vampires. The haunting rebel yell of the Confederate soldiers, because they were vampires. We all bring our own perspective to every story we're a part of, from film, TV, and books, to art and music, to our relationship with other people and our memory of the past. But what Seth Graham Smith did with his novels was to take fully the story and make it his own, to retell it from his own somewhat fantastic perspective. And now, Your Worship Arts team has done the same. We created our own version of images that already exist, from film, TV, and books, art, our relationship with other people, and our memories of the past. And we told the story of those images from our perspective.
So when my daughter was born, I started making calendars with photographs of her. And the first year, I posed her to represent the different holidays in each of the seasons or months. When some of the years, it was when Maxon was born and we would go on vacation, it was photographs of our trip that we would be on the calendar to share with everybody. But one year, I wanted to teach myself the newest version of Photoshop. So I started creating images and posters that emulated or were similar to famous characters in movies. And so when this was brought up to tell a story, I at first thought, we were supposed to take a picture of our kids when they were younger or when we were younger and remake that photograph now, which I have also done. But then I realized that I had kind of done this with all the stories in the past. So the first story is Mad Max. And we had Maxon, and he had this beautiful little leather jacket that he loved to wear. And so we recreated a Mad Max poster, but using our Sweet Max. And then, of course, I had my prom dress and this gorgeous nightgown, and Florida loved to wear them. And I let her. So I let her wear them. I let her play with them. I pin them up in the back, and I started taking photographs of her because she was so gorgeous. And in one of them, just the way she looked, it was all like she was all distressed and distraught because, Tara had been destroyed and we will rebuild. And so I made a Gone with the Wind image with Florida, poster with Florida. And then one time, Max really, for a short period of time, really into superheroes. And so I turned him into Superman because Maxon, Sweet Maxon, is our Superman. And one of my favorites is of Florida, showing her true character. Not so much the evil side of it, but the crazy side of it, the creative side of it, the adventurous side of it. And so I ask you, who is the true Mad Hatter? Because I think it's Florida. Last but not least, I went through a lot of the photographs, or all of the tons of photographs I have of my kids as kids. And I found one when they were really young. So Maxon's maybe 6 months old, and Florida's Maxon's 6'3". And in this photograph, I feel like it shows the personalities and their characters, but it also shows what they were best friends, and they still are best friends. So we retook that photograph now with them as adults to show that they're still best friends, to the point where Florida and Maxon go out on, brother-sister dates once or twice a month and take off and spend all day together. And she's 23 and he's 20. So that's pretty amazing to have two children that are that close. I will be honest, it's nothing I did. They came out that way. It's who they are, these amazing people who, 2 days after Maxon was born, became the bestest of friends.
Back on Mother's Day, I talked about how my mother grew up on a farm in south central Nebraska and how she and her siblings had scattered across the country as adults. Consequently, my cousins and I always lived far away from each other. As an only child myself, both friends and cousins have meant a great deal to me, so I always enjoyed the visits when at least some of the cousins could get together. 3 of us were born within 9 months of each other. Kathy lived in Wichita, Kansas, and later moved to Oregon. Evelyn lived most of her life in Colorado, and I have always lived in Ohio. In the summer of 1949, when we were each around 3 years old, our families all met at our grandparents' farm, which at that time was in Kansas. There are several photos of the 3 of us together, but this one has always been our favorite. Over the years, there were other family gatherings in many places, sometimes with 2 out of the 3 of us included, but never all 3. However, we did keep in touch, mostly through letters and cards, as well as occasional phone calls, and now email as well. It wasn't until 2009 when we planned the reunion near the original farmstead in Nebraska that we 3 were united again. Some second cousins who still live in that area found us a house to rent for several days. It was a former mortuary and was cleverly named Mort's Lodge. Sited in that flat Nebraska farmland, it was surrounded by fields and very little traffic passed by. The decor was Victorian, which made us think of the time when our grandparents were newlyweds. From there, we were able to visit not only the original farm site, but also the cemetery where our grandparents, as well as our great-grandparents, were buried. And we even got to see tiny remnants of a sod house where our grandmother grew up. The little town where our grandfather lived for a while as a widower seemed almost frozen in time. But the landscape was no longer dotted with family farms as it once had been, because most have been bought up by agribusiness. All that was left of the original Rutan farm was the barn, close to falling over, and a bit of the original house's cellar. Near the end of our visit, we 3 cousins decided to pose for a picture somewhat like the one taken 60 years before when we had last all been together. What a special connection.
desperate and broken, sound of a fight. Father has spoken. We were the kings and queens of promise. We were the victims of ourselves. Maybe the children of a lesser God, between heaven and hell, heaven and hell. Into your lives, hopeless and taken, stole our new lives through blood and pain, in defense of our dreams, in defense of our dreams. We were the kings and queens of promise. We were the victims of ourselves. Maybe the children of a lesser God, between heaven and hell, heaven and hell. The age of man is over. A darkness comes and all these lessons that we learn here have only just begun. We were the kings and queens of promise. We were the victims of ourselves. Maybe the children of a lesser God, between heaven and hell. We are the kings. We are the queens. We are the kings. We are the queens. Oh, 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 oh.
I've always been intrigued by one of the most famous paintings of the 20th century, American Gothic, which hangs at the Art Institute in Chicago. Inspired by a small wooden Victorian-era Iowa farmhouse with an oversized window in the Carpenter Gothic style, Grant Wood painted the image in 1930 as an affirmation, even a celebration of Midwestern values, which were being romanticized in a time of great upheaval and disappointment. The Great Depression was in full swing. There's something about the house that feels modestly aspirational. And the characters, modeled by the artist's sister and dentist, are meant to portray a father and daughter who seem to take their hard work and their lives very seriously. About a decade ago, Sister Carmen and I were visiting her mother house in Minnesota. And one morning, we met up in the big living space to discover that we were dressed similarly. Kind of farm formal, but also kind of hippie. Someone commented that we look like the folks in American Gothic. How could we resist snapping a pic, with gestures symbolizing the work of peacemaking we were engaged in, and faces that conveyed the seriousness of the work? Our expressions denied the joy we actually both got from our shared work in a community that appreciated us. A few years later, Joe and I experienced our first big Ohio winter storm. And while we loved it, it was a lot of work moving all that snow and salting all those surfaces. It was work we weren't accustomed to. We took this picture and only afterwards recognized how much of it conveyed the mood of American Gothic. I think that's the great thing about art. Really great art is specific enough that it conveys a story about its time and place, but it's general enough that it allows you to see yourself in the image. It's reflected in your own life. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about the movie Radio Days, a Woody Allen movie from 1987 starring Mia Farrow and a very young Seth Green. I know Woody Allen, with his reputation for being a predator, is disliked among many now, with good reason. But I still love this film. I've seen it so many times, I know practically every line of dialogue by heart. The thing I love about Radio Days is that it's utterly without plot or narrative arc. It's set during World War II, just a series of snippets relating to the radio. Memories of the adult Seth Green character, of times his family's life played out with the radio in the background providing a soundtrack and a score, and urban legends about the people behind the voices. The movie is like real life, especially in the days of COVID, a series of unrelated events that we tie together and give meaning to by simply paying attention to them and remembering them. Each of us has a different interpretation of what we encounter. Each of us finds some small detail to relate to in everything we encounter. Local news, global events, the arts, school and work, celebrity gossip, as we simultaneously enjoy the small moments of togetherness and maybe even fear for the future. Radio Days reminds me that in years to come, when the youngest among us retire and look back at their lives long after I'm gone, they'll remember these times as the good old days, when in the midst of deprivation and hardship, we gathered online and ministers recorded sermons that got broadcast on YouTube. Yet somehow, we were still connected. And they'll look back and remember with fondness the events and the people of the last year. Even though, with the passing of time, the memories will grow dimmer and dimmer.
Hi, I'm Jessie Jones. My inspiration image is Christina's World, a 1948 painting by American artist Andrew Wyeth. Anna Christina Olson, depicted in the painting, was the daughter of friends and neighbors of Wyeth's. Anna suffered from a degenerative muscle disease and lost mobility about age 30. She refused to use a wheelchair, choosing to crawl instead. Prior to this project, I was unaware of the painting's history, but could read Anna's sense of determination and struggle. The setting closely resembles my own land, although today a thickened row of trees obscures the house and barn, and tall trees now surround the field. It's like a map from within my imagination. The homestead in the distance was my grandparents', on the foundation of which we built the house we live in now. The field is my grandparents' legacy. In the early 1950s, around the time of Wyeth's painting, coincidentally, they bought 65 acres of beautiful but economically undesirable land. It was delineated from the seller's larger parcel by remnants of barbed wire that marked it as a sheep pasture. Dominated by swamps, streams, rocky outcroppings, and poor soil, it was ill-suited to farming, logging, or most other exploitation. The long parcel is hemmed along the downhill edge by an eastern branch of the Chagrin River. The mainly wooded land rises in wrinkles from the precipitous banks of the river up to the shoulders of the cool, damp sandstone cliffs, cut by spring-fed streams and punctuated with vernal pools. Along the river are mostly hemlock, rising to oak, with birch and hickory on the flats, making way to beech and maple up through the cliffs. Back then, there was an active sugar bush and a scenic network of jeep roads, making the farthest reaches accessible. The few openings were overgrown with hawthorn, crabapple, and multiflora rose. Sheep had grazed most of the spring ephemeral wildflowers. At the time they bought the land, my grandparents were living in the roadside sentry house they had restored. During restoration, they lived in another sentry house at the top edge of the land that had once boasted a view cleared all the way to the river. Around 1960, they purchased a Massey Ferguson tractor with all the fittings to aid in their placemaking and named it Merlin. In their early 50s and underemployed, with the help of Merlin, they painstakingly removed the brush and stumps from a gently sloping, soggy 13-acre swath in the center of the land, re-clearing the view most of the way from the old sentry house to the river, and creating the big field. Once cleared, they built the lake, a 1-acre pond constructed to focus the output of the dozens of natural springs. Even in the hottest summers, the water is cool and clear in the depths, but my mother recalled waiting over 9 months for the lake to fill, while they planted and mulched and tended small pine trees on the banks, some of which trees later formed the beams over my head. Over the next several years, first my grandparents and then my parents built small houses in the forest, safely and quietly far from the road. A beach, a dock, and a floating raft with diving board were added to the lake, where we spent every summer afternoon through my childhood. We constructed more trails in the forest, perfect for full moon skiing and cool walks on hot summer days. Merlin was joined by Digby the garden tractor and Monty the golf cart. In some of the best years of my life, ours was the favorite house where all my teenage friends could escape the stresses of school and broken homes. As a young child, we left the land only infrequently, but enough for me to understand that what surrounded us was unusual. Other families didn't live like this. The splendor, privacy, and freedom are luxuries few people experience. I gradually discovered it also meant significant responsibility and costs of stewardship. When my father had opportunities to return to his native New York City or move to Chicago or New Zealand to pursue his architecture career, all the pros and cons would be rehashed, but we always ended up staying. My older New York cousins spent a summer logging and selling firewood. Storms took down the sugar bush and other big trees. My grandmother was diagnosed with cancer in her 60s and passed in 1981. My grandfather followed 9 years later. He left the front half of the land to my uncle, his estranged son, who sold out to my parents for top market value, dashing their hopes of retirement savings as my sister and I were graduating from college. As young adults, my sister and I started families far away in places like other kids live. My parents sold the back half of the land, including their house, to the Geauga Park District in a move that simultaneously restored retirement security and protected the land from development. They arranged with the Park District for a living trust on their house and the surrounding land so they could remain in their home for the rest of their lives. Adding a conservation easement to the remaining land, including the big field, assured protection and established a joint legacy of the two generations. It was my mother's cancer diagnosis in her 60s that brought me home, but my sister had enough of country living and stayed in the suburbs. We built our family home on the foundation of the tiny retirement cottage my grandparents built, so my kids have their grandparents next door like I did. Now my sister and I jointly own the lake and the big field and the wooded streams that border it. Her kids are grown and gone, and mine are teenagers. The lake is silting up, and the driveway needed to be replaced after a big storm last spring. My mom passed, and my dad is 79. We routinely walk through the backwoods, increasingly slowly, which pleases my two cats who like to join us. But what is next? Maybe 10 years or more until the next generation of Dixon Cadwallader McCullum Jones Moores joins us. A few years ago, after studying satellite images of the big field, my fellow permaculture designer, Cara DePaul, privately told me that she had seen the image of an old woman curled up in the hillside in this image, radiating a calm and loving protection. Anna Christina Olsen's mobility limitations and physical proximity to the land feel like a metaphor for how entwined my life is with the land, regardless of my own autoimmune disease. This is the legacy thinking in my head as I recline in the big field on the hillside I walk across every day, where years ago we scattered the ashes of my grandmother and more recently of my mother.
Doctor Who, a British sci-fi series that began airing in 1963, tells the story of a time-traveling alien, a Time Lord, known simply as the Doctor, and his companions. Instead of weapons or guns, he travels the universe and time with two hearts, the ability to regenerate, a sonic screwdriver, and a big around-the-inside blue police box known as a TARDIS. Time and relative dimension in space. Some events are fixed points in time and cannot be changed. Others are, well, as they say, a little more timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly. In the universe of Doctor Who, paradoxes happen. Bow ties are definitely cool. Everyone has the chance for worth and redemption, and sometimes you definitely have to remember not to blink. The show has an incredibly devoted following. Ask any Whovian who their favorite doctor or companion is, and you'll get a wide range of answers. Ask them their favorite episode, and often the answer is Vincent and the Doctor. The mere mention or memory of the episode is enough to cause some to tear up, and many of us hold the episode close to our hearts. In the episode, the Doctor and his companion, Amy Pond, are visiting a Vincent van Gogh exhibit in a museum. In the exhibit hangs one of the artist's well-known paintings, The Church at Auvers, painted just a year before his suicide. The Doctor spots something awry with the painting, an ominous face in a window of the church, and the pair are off to investigate, traveling back in time to June of 1890 in search of the artist. Their journey back finds Vincent a penniless man, mocked by the townspeople as a mad drunk, and a failure. The townspeople even blame him for a couple of brutal murders that have happened in the town, throwing stones at him. Amy and the doctor get to know Vincent, cringing in agony as they see him toss aside paintings in his shack of a house that they know are precious in the future. He speaks of how he paints the way he sees the world, how he hears colors, and how he believes there is so much more than what the normal eye sees. Amy especially connects with him, with Vincent's struggles with mental health and self-doubt. He helps her recognize her own deep sorrow. The ominous face they had spotted in the painting turns out to be a lost creature called a Crephaeus, who had been killing townspeople while lashing out in fear. Amy, the doctor, and Vincent search out and battle the creature, with Vincent accidentally killing it in self-defense. He mourns this action, recognizing its lonely existence as a parallel to his own. Amy and the doctor bring Vincent forward into the future, to the museum and the exhibit of his paintings. As he looks around at the crowd, the doctor asks the curator where he thought Van Gogh rated in the history of art. Vincent stands and listens silently as the curator answers, speaking of Van Gogh as one of the greatest painters of all time. He transformed the pain of his tormented life into ecstatic beauty. Pain is easy to portray, but to use your passion and pain to portray the ecstasy and joy and magnificence of our world, no one had ever done it before. He continues on to describe him as one of the greatest men who ever lived. Tears stream down Vincent's face, as for the first time ever, he truly knows that people will someday love his work. The artist is invigorated and determined, sure that he will use this to become a new man. They return him to his own time and say goodbye. Amy is so excited to return to the museum, sure that they have changed Vincent's life and destiny. She is shocked when she finds out that he still committed suicide a year after they left him. She is convinced that they made no difference in Vincent's life. But the doctor replies to this, explaining, "I wouldn't say that. The way I see it, every life is a pile of good things and bad things. The good things don't always soften the bad things, but vice versa. The bad things don't necessarily spoil the good things or make them unimportant. And we definitely added to his pile of good things." To me, the story of Vincent and the doctor speaks to the idea that what we do for people matters, even when sometimes it may feel like we've made no real difference. That giving someone a good moment or making a small piece of something better still matters. That joy and beauty matter, no matter how small. And that the right, kind things matter, even when they won't change the outcome.
You change every story you come into contact with. Every book is different for having been read and discussed by you. Every film or TV show is different for having been viewed and critiqued by you. And every congregation of people is different for having counted you among their numbers. Members and friends, thank you for counting yourself among our numbers, for continuing to send in your pledge checks to the office each month, and the myriad of other ways in which you give your time, presence, and existence as a part of East Shore. And to our honored guests today, thank you for including us in your story today. Even if we never know how it changed you, we are delighted to have joined you to travel this part of your journey. We hope you enjoyed this time together as a gift to you. Have an incredible day. Our benediction this morning comes to us from Reverend Dr. Cynthia Landrum. We leave this gathered community, but we don't leave our connection. Our concerns, our care for each other, our service to each other, to the world, and to our faith continues. Until we are together again, friends, be strong, be well, be true, be loving.
We join hands
In Unitarian Universalist fellowship,
pledging ourselves to an individual religious freedom,
which transcends all creeds,
not to think alike,
but to journey together